On August 4, 2026, celebrity blogger Perez Hilton was hospitalized after live streaming an apparent mental health crisis from his South Florida home. During the disturbing broadcast, Hilton appeared completely covered in blood and seemingly harmed himself as horrified viewers contacted authorities, while TikTok also reportedly alerted police after detecting the live stream. Even more disturbing, Hilton's 3 children had reportedly been inside the home shortly before the crisis. His sister and niece realized something was seriously wrong and fled with the children only minutes before the live stream began. Police arrived around 7 p.m., but rather than immediately entering the home, spent nearly 4 hours attempting to de-escalate the situation out of concern that a confrontation could potentially provoke a suicide by cops scenario. Hilton was eventually taken to a hospital and placed under Florida's Baker Act for psychiatric evaluation. The incident followed an already brutal year for the famous blogger. Months earlier, Perez spent 21 days hospitalized after a perforated ulcer led to severe sepsis, and soon afterward, doctors discovered a massive blood clot in his leg requiring emergency surgery. A few weeks before the live stream, Hilton also publicly admitted he was in a spiral and felt overwhelmed after moving back to Miami, a city he's reportedly associated with traumatic memories, including witnessing his father and grandfather dying just a week apart when he was younger. As of the latest update, Hilton remains hospitalized and receiving treatment, with his family saying he's safe, able to communicate, and surrounded by loved ones, while asking the public to respect his privacy as he recovers. In Addo Elephant National Park, South Africa, a lioness named Josie went blind around age 12, likely from untreated eye disease such as cataracts or glaucoma. In the wild, that's almost always a death sentence, since lionesses rely on vision to hunt and avoid threats. But instead of abandoning her, her 2 adult daughters stayed by her side for the next 5 years. They guided her using contact calls, flanked her while moving so she wouldn't walk into danger, and shared their kills so she could eat despite being unable to hunt. Thanks to her daughters, she survived like this until about age 17, which is already near the upper limit of a wild lion's lifespan. 2008, on a beach in Montauk, Long Island, New York, a bloated, hairless carcass washed ashore with no clear identifying features, quickly dubbed the Montauk Monster. The body was already in an advanced state of decomposition, likely causing the loss of fur and the distorted shape of the head and limbs. As photos spread online, some speculated it was an escaped or discarded experiment from the nearby Plum Island, home to a government animal disease research facility, or something connected to rumored labs in Montauk. Wildlife experts said it was most likely a raccoon or dog altered by decay and water exposure, which can strip fur and change how the skull appears. No official identification was ever confirmed, and the body disappeared shortly after being photographed, leaving the Montauk Monster unresolved and open to speculation. Before the hangover made him famous, a struggling Zach Galifianakis befriended Mimi Haste, a homeless laundromat attendant who'd been living at the laundromat for years after her marriage ended. After finding success, Zach quietly rented her an apartment, helped furnish it with the help of actress Renee Zellweger, and regularly brought Mimi as his date to Hollywood premieres. Their unlikely friendship became the subject of the 2015 documentary Queen Mimi. Mimi died in 2021 at age 96, having spent her final years surrounded by friends who helped change her life. Some of Michael Jackson's most iconic dance moves were likely inspired by Bob Fosse. Throughout the 1974 film The Little Prince, Fosse performs movements that look strangely familiar: sliding footwork, sharp kicks, hip isolations, sudden poses, and his signature use of a black hat. Jackson was a known admirer of Fosse, and years later, many of these same mannerisms became staples of Michael's performances. Jackson combined them with influences from James Brown, Fred Astaire, and street dancers to create a style that became unmistakably his own. In 2015, actor Steve Rannazzisi, best known for playing Kevin on The League, publicly admitted that he had lied for more than a decade about surviving the 9/11 attacks. He had repeatedly claimed he was working on a high floor at the World Trade Center and narrowly escaped when the planes hit. But after journalists discovered that Merrill Lynch had no offices in the towers and that Rannazzisi was never there, the actor confessed the story was fabricated and that he was actually in Midtown Manhattan. The admission sparked widespread backlash for obvious reasons, with many accusing him of exploiting a national tragedy and the trauma of real survivors, permanently damaging his reputation. Here's a video demonstrating the potency of the venom from a Russell's viper. Russell's vipers are among the most venomous snakes in the world, responsible for tens of thousands of serious bites each year across Southeast Asia. Their venom contains enzymes that aggressively activate the blood's clotting factors, forcing clots to form through the bloodstream. Here's what that looks like in human blood. These abnormal clots can block blood flow to vital organs, increasing the risk of strokes and heart attacks. As clotting factors are rapidly exhausted, the blood loses its ability to clot where it's needed, intentionally leading to internal bleeding, shock, and organ failure. In 2012, two 13-year-old boys in Wisconsin were apparently so desperate for pizza and weed that they resorted to something horrific. They lured one boy's 78-year-old great-grandmother into her garage and brutally attacked her with a hatchet and hammer, caving in her skull and leaving her to die on the cold floor. They then rifled through her purse, walking away with just $155, blood money that hours later they blew on pizza, marijuana, and video games, laughing as if nothing happened. Investigators described the scene as one of the most disturbing they'd ever witnessed. The frail woman's body left beaten and discarded over a sum barely worth a week's allowance. Both boys were quickly arrested, showed little remorse, and were sentenced to decades in prison, ensuring the rest of their youth would be spent behind bars. In 1978, San Francisco was left shaken when disgruntled former city supervisor Dan White snuck into City Hall through a basement window and gunned down Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk in cold blood. At trial, prosecutors expected an easy murder conviction, but White's lawyers argued that he was deeply depressed, pointing to drastic lifestyle changes, including a diet of sugary junk food like Twinkies, as proof of his unraveling mental state. The bizarre argument, later mocked as the Twinkie defense, convinced jurors to downgrade his charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter. White was sentenced to just over 7 years, but walked free after barely serving 5. The shocking leniency sparked outrage across San Francisco, fueling the violent White Night riots and leaving the city completely haunted by the fact that the man who assassinated both its mayor and his supervisor spent less time in prison than many would serve for petty crimes. Before becoming one of Hollywood's toughest actors, Jon Bernthal spent years getting into violent street fights, was arrested multiple times, and later admitted he was headed down roads he shouldn't have survived. In 2009, while walking his dog, he punched a man during a confrontation, knocking him unconscious after the man's head struck the pavement. Handcuffed to a police station bench, Bernthal was told that if the victim died, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. The man ultimately survived, but Bernthal said the incident permanently changed him, leading him to abandon violence and channel that side of himself into acting instead. He's since revealed his nose has been broken about 15 times from a lifetime of fights and physically demanding roles. In 2019, Zhao Jingqian fell headfirst from a warehouse roof while rescuing a trapped toddler, using his own body to absorb the impact and save the child's life. After briefly waking from a CT scan to ask, "Is the child okay?" he slipped back into a coma with severe brain damage. His wife, Song Mei, quit her job to care for him full-time, and after doctors suggested stimulating his feet, she began biting his toes every day for nearly 7 years after noticing it triggered a response. In June 2026, Zhao finally turned to her and whispered, "Song Mei, I love you." During writing therapy, the only word he can currently write is her name. Michael J. Fox was at the peak of his career when his life quietly turned into a tragedy. While filming Doc Hollywood at just 29 years old, he was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease, something doctors typically only see in elderly patients. He was so young that he thought the diagnosis had to be a mistake, but when specialists confirmed it, he went home, stared at the wall, and quickly fell into a deep depression, drinking heavily and hiding the truth from everyone for years, even his castmates. As the disease slowly destroyed his body, the world had no idea that while he was smiling and cracking jokes on the sitcom Spin City, his hand was shaking uncontrollably off camera. Directors had to constantly hide his symptoms by forcing him to sit during scenes or hold props with both hands. But Parkinson's didn't just steal his movement, it came with the threat of dementia, hallucination, and total loss of independence, a slow countdown he could do nothing to stop. Fox has since shattered bones from violent falls, undergone risky spinal surgery, and admitted that every day he wakes up with less control than the day before. A once energetic Back to the Future star has spent over 30 years watching himself fade in slow motion, and he said the moment he was diagnosed, "I felt my future get sucked out of the room." But instead of giving up, Michael turned his pain into purpose, founding the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which has now raised over $2 billion for Parkinson's research, making it the largest nonprofit funder of the disease in history by far. Despite losing control of his body, Fox might be the reason millions of others one day get theirs back. In November of 2020, 80-year-old Paulette Landreau, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, suddenly disappeared from her home in Belgium. Despite helicopters, thermal cams, tracking dogs, and massive search efforts, she seemed to vanish without a trace. But 2 years later, a Google Street View image taken on the day she disappeared was discovered showing her walking toward a neighboring property. Police retraced her final steps and found her remains hidden beneath dense shrubs at the bottom of a steep embankment just yards from where she was last seen. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, concluding she had most likely suffered a fatal accidental fall. In 2017, 16-year-old Davis Allen Kripe suddenly collapsed and died after drinking a large caffeinated latte, a Mountain Dew, and 2 energy drinks within 2 hours. According to the coroner, the rapid caffeine intake triggered a fatal heart rhythm disturbance. Although the total caffeine wasn't considered unusually high for an adult, officials said drinking it all within such a short period completely overwhelmed his body. In 886, Byzantine Emperor Basil I was hunting when his belt suddenly became tangled in a stag's antlers, causing the terrified animal to drag him roughly 16 miles through the wilderness. By the time he was finally freed, he had suffered catastrophic internal injuries, broken bones, and severe trauma across most of his body. Basil lingered in agony for several days before finally dying from his injuries. Melissa La Diabla Calderon became one of the most feared women in cartel history because her crimes went far beyond gunshots and executions. Working with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, she targeted the most vulnerable, migrants, pregnant women, and the homeless, luring them with promises of safety or work before trapping them inside of makeshift clinics. Investigators say she performed crude C-sections to steal newborns for black market adoption, while the mothers were left to bleed out on the table. In other cases, victims were cut open and stripped of their organs, their bodies dumped or incinerated before corrupt medical contacts funneled their organs to wealthy buyers. Witnesses reported hearing screams through the walls at night, and bodies were found mutilated or missing several organs. Even hardened cartel enforcers were terrified of La Diabla, calling her the devil in human skin. When she was finally arrested, authorities believed dozens, maybe hundreds of her victims would never be found. Steve Irwin spent his entire life working hands-on with animals that could kill him, and he openly said that if he ever died, it would likely be from wildlife. Throughout his career, he was constantly bitten, cut, and injured by snakes, lizards, and crocodiles. There were multiple close calls where crocodiles snapped inches from his body. He regularly handled some of the most venomous snakes in the world in remote areas, where a single bite could have easily been fatal before help arrived. This was one of the last photos ever taken of Steve off the coast of Queensland in 2006 before a stingray struck him with its tail, sending a barb through his chest and directly into his heart. Fatal stingray injuries like this are extremely rare, with fewer than 20 documented deaths worldwide since the 1950s. The barb was quickly pulled out during the emergency, which likely accelerated the bleeding, but the damage to his heart was already catastrophic either way. The moment was caught on camera, and the footage was reportedly destroyed before it was ever released. According to those present, his final words were reportedly, "I'm dying," before he went into cardiac arrest. The stingray is believed to have acted defensively as Steve approached from above. Despite decades of surviving encounters with some of the most dangerous animals on Earth, Steve died from a single rare defensive strike, the exact kind of risk he had always accepted. In 2025, 32-year-old Sonia Exelby traveled alone from the United Kingdom to Florida after allegedly paying 53-year-old Dwayne Hall $4,000 to sexually abuse, torture, and ultimately kill her. Investigators say Hall purchased rope, paracord, a shovel, and other supplies shortly before picking her up at the Gainesville airport. Sonia had reportedly attempted a similar trip the year before, but it had been stopped before she could follow through. This time, however, messages she allegedly sent after meeting Hall suggested the reality was far worse than she expected. She was frightened, in severe pain, and appeared to no longer want what was happening to her. Despite this, prosecutors allege Hall continued holding and abusing her before stabbing her to death and burying her body in a shallow grave in a wooded area. Her remains were discovered about a week later. Hall was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping and is awaiting trial. In February of 2000, Australian slaughterhouse worker Katherine Knight murdered her partner John Price in their home in Aberdeen, New South Wales. After an argument, she waited for him to fall asleep and stabbed him 37 times as he tried to escape, with blood evidence showing he made it to the front door before collapsing. Once he was dead, Knight used her butchering skills to skin his body in one piece and hung the skin on a meat hook in the living room. She then decapitated him and placed his head in a pot of boiling water, along with pieces of flesh to make a stew. She also cooked parts of his glutes in the oven and arranged 2 dinner plates with meat, vegetables, and gravy, each labeled with the names of Price's children, indicating she had intended to serve them their father. Police discovered the staged meal, the pot on the stove, and Price's skin hanging inside the house. Knight pled guilty to murder and in 2001 was sentenced to life in prison without parole, becoming the first woman in Australian history to receive that sentence. This was the moment a 5-year-old girl was attacked by a raccoon while waiting for her school bus in Connecticut. The animal suddenly bit into her leg, refusing to let go as she screamed and kicked. Hearing the screams, her mother ran outside and grabbed the raccoon with her bare hands, prying it off her daughter. She held on to the animal and restrained it as her daughter ran inside, keeping control of it while making sure another child nearby was no longer in danger. Once she was certain the situation was under control, the mother yeeted the raccoon away, ending the attack. The girl suffered multiple puncture wounds to her leg, though doctors later said her genes likely prevented far more serious damage. Raccoons almost never attack people, especially during daylight, and because of the animal's extreme aggression, doctors feared rabies exposure. Both the mother and daughter were required to undergo emergency rabies treatment, but they eventually made a full recovery. This was the moment a jewelry store was wiped out in just 30 seconds. In 2025 in Fremont, California, nearly 24 thieves stormed into Kumar Jewelers at once, armed with hammers and tools. Within seconds, they began smashing display cases and sweeping jewelry into bags as employees were forced to stand back. By the time it was over, $1.7 million worth of jewelry, about 80% of the store's inventory, was wiped out in just over a minute. The group dispersed in multiple getaway cars and several arrests were later made, but most of the crew remains unidentified and the majority of the stolen jewelry has never been found. In New York City, Darius McCollum developed an obsessive fixation on the transit system that led him to repeatedly impersonate MTA employees and take control of buses and subway trains. Beginning as a teenager, he was arrested more than 30 times after entering restricted areas, operating vehicles, and running full routes while delivering accurate announcements and staying on schedule. He wasn't stealing the vehicles or trying to escape, he was operating the job with precision. Each incident still carried real risk, and over time the pattern didn't stop. He continued being arrested well into adulthood, spending years cycling through jail and psychiatric evaluations. Despite national attention and a 2016 documentary about his case, there was still no long-term solution put in place, as he remained stuck between the transit system he was obsessed with and a justice system that had no idea how to effectively handle the situation. Former Korean model Hong Myoku became addicted to cosmetic surgery, undergoing numerous silicone injections until surgeons refused to perform any more because her face had become dangerously swollen. But unable to stop, she began injecting herself with black market silicone and eventually even cooking oil, causing massive inflammation, permanent tissue damage, and severe facial disfigurement. Doctors later removed massive amounts of silicone, oil, scar tissue, and damaged skin through multiple reconstructive surgeries, but the damage was irreversible. After a severe electrical shock destroyed 99% of a man's nose, Iraqi plastic surgeon Dr. Dr. Abdul Wahid reconstructed it by implanting cartilage beneath the skin of the patient's forehead, where it developed a healthy blood supply and gradually grew into the shape of a new nose. Weeks later, surgeons transferred the tissue to the center of his nose and sculpted it into a functioning nose. The procedure gave the patient a chance to regain both his appearance and the ability to breathe normally again, after a horrific injury that left him almost completely without a nose. Researchers off the coast of Tenerife have captured extremely rare footage of a black sea devil, a deep-sea anglerfish that usually lives thousands of feet below the surface, swimming in unusually shallow water. The black sea devil is almost never seen alive in daylight, and scientists say this may be the first ever recorded video of the species swimming near the surface. Its sudden emergence has left researchers completely baffled, since deep-sea anglerfish usually only rise from the depths when they're sick, dying, or pushed upward by shifting ocean conditions. Here's a rare view of the insane intricacies of a computer chip. What you're looking at is a maze of microscopic pathways where billions of transistors switch on and off to process every command a device makes. The structures are engineered at a scale smaller than wavelengths of visible light, pushing the limits of modern manufacturing. Because of how abstract it looks at this level, it's often cited as an example of alien technology. That was a digital recreation of images, since a standard optical microscope can't resolve details that small. In order to actually see structures at that level in video format, you would need an extremely high-powered electron microscope.
I shot Sergeant Gibson. Do what? I shot Sergeant Gibson. I pulled a gun on him. Can you investigate me? Is he breathing? He just fell out.
That was the voice of police officer Michael Rusk calling 911 in James City County, Virginia in 2023, telling dispatch he had just shot his own sergeant after claiming he was about to be sexually assaulted. According to Rusk, Gibson had made prior unwanted advances, and that night the situation escalated when Gibson allegedly tried to force himself onto him. During the struggle, Rusk said he repeatedly told him to stop before pulling out his gun and firing several shots. Michael's father, Jason Rusk, said he told him about unwanted attention he received from his superior officer leading up to the shooting, and that he'd reported it to others in the department several times.
There was a year's worth of grooming that had taken place. Extremely inappropriate touching, stalking, the grooming, the previous to the incident assaults.
Here's a video showing the officers at the bar prior to the shooting, where Gibson gets out of his seat to sit next to Rusk before reaching over to hold his hand, which Rusk appears to turn down. Then, about an hour before the shooting, the two can be seen outside before apparently leaving together. Gibson puts his hand on Rusk's shoulder, and Rusk responds by pushing him away and pointing a finger in his face. It's unclear what happened next, but after the shooting, Rusk made this claim to the dispatcher.
I told him to stop. He kept going. Help me. Help.
Gibson was hit several times and survived after emergency surgery. When officers arrived, Rusk was still on the scene and was immediately taken into custody. Investigators said the physical evidence didn't fully support a clear-cut self-defense claim, leading to Rusk being charged with several felonies. In 2024, Rusk took a plea deal, avoiding active prison time, but losing his career in law enforcement and his right to carry a firearm. In September of 2025, 21-year-old University of Kentucky cheerleader Laken Snelling was arrested after her roommate called 911 to report finding a dead newborn in their off-campus home. The baby boy was found wrapped in a towel and shoved into a black garbage bag in the back of a closet. When first responders arrived, the baby was described as cold to the touch, suggesting he had been there for hours. Police later learned Snelling had secretly carried the pregnancy to term, delivered the baby in silence, and left him hidden before leaving the house. She was later taken into custody and charged with abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. Since her arrest, Snelling has withdrawn from the university and is no longer listed on the school's cheer team. If convicted, the felony charges alone carry up to 5 years in prison and thousands in fines. She was released on a $100,000 bond and is currently under house arrest with her parents in Tennessee as investigators continue to determine the baby's cause of death. As a teenager, Euphoria star Angus Cloud survived a life-threatening head injury after falling into a construction site, fracturing his skull and requiring emergency brain surgery, leaving a long scar along his head. He was later discovered on the street with no prior acting experience and cast in Euphoria, where he became known for playing a drug dealer. But in July of 2023 in Oakland, the 25-year-old died from an accidental overdose, including fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and benzodiazepines, a lethal combination that can quickly lead to respiratory failure. His death came just days after burying his father, who died from cancer, and he had returned to the home where his father passed, reportedly struggling with grief and mental health in the days leading up to his death. Eerily, he previously said he wanted to portray Mac Miller in a biopic, who died in 2018 from a similar fentanyl-related overdose. In 2018 in California, 23-year-old Angela Hernandez drove off a cliff along Highway 1, plunging about 200 feet into the ocean below. The impact left her with a brain hemorrhage, broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and broken collarbones. After regaining consciousness inside the submerged vehicle, she managed to escape before it sank, swim to shore, and climb onto a narrow rocky ledge beneath the cliff. With no supplies and severely injured, she survived for 7 days by drinking fresh water that dripped down from moss and vegetation on the rock face. She was eventually spotted by passing hikers along the roadway, who alerted authorities, leading to her rescue and evacuation to a hospital. After retiring from the NFL in 1990, Hall of Famer Mike Webster's life unraveled into a spiral of bizarre and disturbing behavior. Once celebrated as the Iron Man of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he spent his final years homeless or sleeping in his pickup truck, suffering crushing headaches, dementia, and paranoia. Friends and family later described shocking habits: urinating in his own oven, shocking himself with a taser just to fall asleep, and gluing his decaying teeth back together. At one point, he even carried around a briefcase filled with superglue, painkillers, and duct tape, using them as makeshift tools to hold his broken body together. By the time he died of a heart attack in 2002 at just 50 years old, Webster's decline had become a cautionary tale of the hidden costs of football. When doctors examined his brain, they discovered the first confirmed case of CTE in an NFL player, proof of how the game had slowly destroyed him from the inside out. This was the moment a man turned a robbery attempt into an instant retreat. Security footage shows a group of thieves pulling up to rob him while he was pumping gas, but instead of freezing, the man immediately sprayed them with the gas hose, forcing them to flee. Gasoline can be extremely irritating to the eyes and skin, causing intense burning, tearing, blurred vision, and temporary blindness. Being soaked in fuel also creates a serious fire risk, making it incredibly risky for attackers to stay close or continue the assault. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, here's a clip of a tarantula walking on the surface. Some species of tarantulas are able to stand and move across the surface of water, thanks to a combination of their light body weight and the tiny water-repellent hairs that cover their bodies. These hairs trap air and increase surface tension, allowing the spider to distribute its weight without breaking through. When threatened or escaping predators, tarantulas can briefly run across lakes, streams, or flooded ground, giving the illusion that it's literally walking on water before climbing back to safety. That is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. As a child, Michael's father Joseph would constantly torment him about his appearance, often calling him Fat Nose. Michael went on to have 4 rhinoplasties and was insecure about his appearance for his entire life. According to his former doctor, Conrad Murray, Michael's father chemically castrated him when he was a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. On one occasion in the 1960s, Joe wanted to teach his kids a lesson about leaving the windows open at night. So when little Michael was asleep, his father climbed through the window wearing a mask and screamed at him. From that point on, Michael would have recurring nightmares about being kidnapped from his bedroom. But the abuse didn't stop there. Joe would also hold onto a belt while the Jackson 5 rehearsed, ready to strike his children if one of them made a mistake. Michael was reportedly so terrified of his father that he would sometimes throw up just from merely being in his presence. He once said he felt the safest while performing on stage since his father wouldn't be able to beat him in front of a crowd. From a very young age, Michael described being forced into long, exhausting rehearsals for hours at a time, completely missing out on a normal childhood. He said watching other kids play from the window while he rehearsed was one of the memories that stayed with him the most. In 2022, DMV rapper Markel Moro, aka Gunu, was shot and killed in Washington, D.C. Days later, his family held a memorial inside a D.C. nightclub where his embalmed body was dressed in designer clothes, propped upright on stage, and displayed while his music played to a crowd. The invite-only event was attended by family, friends, and fans, turning a nightclub into a viewing space and leaving people standing feet away from his real corpse. There's no evidence Gunu ever requested this, making it one of the strangest memorials ever held for a deceased rapper. A baby named Breland was born completely healthy, but just 2 days after birth, she was kissed on the mouth by someone with an active cold sore. Because her immune system was not yet developed, she contracted herpes simplex virus, which spread to her brain and caused HSV encephalitis. The infection led to seizures and permanent brain damage, another case demonstrating why you should be very careful when kissing a baby. In 1925, Ora Ralph Thomas, an Illinois sheriff's deputy during the Prohibition era, was assassinated by members of the KKK. Thomas was the leader of an armed anti-Klan paramilitary group, making him a direct target. When 3 Klansmen ambushed him, Thomas returned fire, shooting and killing all 3 of his attackers before succumbing to his own wounds. A North Carolina man was sentenced to nearly a decade in prison after one of the most disturbing neglect cases in recent history. For 6 to 8 months, 66-year-old Bonnie Kornhaber, who was bound to a wheelchair, lay helplessly on the floor of her cluttered, hoarded home after falling from her chair. Her husband Lewis admitted he never called for help because he was embarrassed embarrassed about the conditions inside, leaving her to waste away surrounded by spoiled food, trash, and insects. When Bonnie finally told him she couldn't breathe, he ignored her pleas and watched TV in another room until she was dead. By the time first responders arrived, her body was covered in sores and filth, and Lewis was later convicted of second-degree murder and neglect, sealing his downfall after nearly 40 years of marriage. So, where the hell is Savannah Guthrie's mom? Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, was last seen when her family dropped her off at her home in Arizona on the night of January 31st, 2026. By the following morning, she was gone. Concern quickly grew when she failed to show up for church on Sunday morning, something her friends described as highly out of character, prompting them to contact her family. Inside her home, her car, phone, and daily medication were all left behind, a detail investigators described as especially alarming, considering her limited mobility and reliance on those medications. Police stated she had no history of wandering, confusion, or cognitive decline, making it highly unlikely she would have left on her own, especially at night. Despite the apparent urgency of the situation, there were no publicly reported signs of forced entry or a struggle, only deepening the unease surrounding how she disappeared without a trace. Investigators later described the scene inside the home as very concerning, saying they believe she didn't leave voluntarily and that the case should be treated as a potential crime. Authorities have since collected DNA evidence, involved multiple agencies, and are reviewing tips and nearby surveillance footage, but as of now, no suspect or confirmed lead has been announced. Daisy Coleman grew up in a family marked by repeated tragedy. In 2009, her father was killed when their car slipped on black ice and plunged into a ravine in Missouri. In 2012, at age 14, Daisy was sexually assaulted while incapacitated and left outside her home in freezing temperatures. Despite hospital records documenting injuries and extreme intoxication, the charges were later dropped, and she was publicly discredited, triggering years of vicious harassment. In 2013, the family's home burned down under mysterious circumstances, and in 2018, Daisy's younger brother Tristan died in a car crash, mirroring their father's death. By 2020, Daisy was struggling with severe PTSD, harassment, a reported stalker, and learning she couldn't have children, a condition doctors said may have been linked to the assault. Daisy's story was documented in Audrey and Daisy, released while she was still trying to rebuild her life. This was the moment Diana Lovejoy collapsed in court after being found guilty of plotting to kill her ex-husband, Greg Mulvihill. Locked in a bitter custody battle over their young son, Lovejoy feared losing her boy and conspired with her firearms instructor Weldon McDavid Jr. to eliminate Mulvihill. In 2016, she lured her ex-husband to a remote dirt road where McDavid ambushed him with a rifle. Shot in the torso, Mulvihill survived by playing dead and calling 911. Investigators traced the attack back to Lovejoy and McDavid, and both were convicted. She received 26 years to life, while he was sentenced to 50 years. Doctors across the world have documented shocking cases of patients arriving in the ER with objects lodged deep inside their bodies. But one of the strangest in history involved a 5-pound dumbbell. The patient arrived in agonizing pain but refused to explain how it got there, forcing surgeons to perform a delicate operation to extract it. Britain's most prolific executioner, Albert Pierrepoint, spent 25 years hanging up to 600 criminals, but it was only his side hustle. By day, he ran a pub where locals drank with him, knowing full well he was also the hangman. In 1950, one of his own regulars, a man he nicknamed Tish, was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, and it was Pierrepoint himself who placed the noose around his neck and carried out the execution. Kyle Marissa Roth blew up on TikTok for fearlessly exposing celebrity scandals using follower-submitted blind items. Despite her bold personality online, she was quietly battling serious health issues behind the scenes, reportedly suffering from chronic pain and illness that she never fully shared with her audience. But instead of letting it break her, she used it as fuel. Roth said that seeing other chronically ill people push through their struggles inspired her to keep making content. However, in April of 2024, she was suddenly found dead at just 36 years old, leaving millions of followers stunned and searching for answers. Even stranger, just days before she died, Roth had posted videos saying she was going through something but would explain soon. Her cause of death still hasn't publicly been released, but her family has asked for privacy and insisted that she was deeply loved. The woman who spent her life revealing secrets left the world with one of her own, but fans remember her not just for the drama she uncovered, but also for her humor, bravery, and the way she made people feel seen and entertained during their darkest days. Here's a photo of a young American soldier who would become the face of one of the darkest scandals of the Iraq War. Sabrina Harmon was a 26-year-old U.S. Army reservist stationed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2003, where she became involved in a massive abuse scandal after photographs surfaced showing prisoners being humiliated, tortured, and posed like trophies. In the most infamous image, Harmon is seen smiling and giving a thumbs up while standing next to the dead body of an Iraqi detainee named Monadel al-Jamadi, who had died in agony during a CIA interrogation after being suspended from the ceiling by his wrists. Other photos of her showed naked prisoners stacked in pyramids, forced to simulate sex acts, threatened with dogs, and terrorized while hooded and restrained. Many of the prisoners photographed were never charged with any crime. Some were held solely because they were picked up during raids or turned in by rivals for bounties. Harmon later admitted she took dozens of photos and wrote home that the abuse was a joke and that watching prisoners suffer and die was, quote, pretty funny. She was convicted in 2005 of conspiracy, dereliction of duty, and maltreatment, and sentenced to 6 months in military prison, a dishonorable discharge, and loss of rank. The images shocked the world and became some of the most infamous symbols of U.S. war crimes in Iraq. The scourged back is an 1863 photograph of an escaped enslaved man named Peter, also known as Gordon, taken after he reached a Union Army camp during the American Civil War. The image shows his back covered in thick keloid scars caused by repeated brutal whippings while enslaved on a Louisiana plantation. The scars were the result of agonizing abuse severe enough to permanently disfigure his skin. When the photograph was published and widely circulated in northern newspapers, it provided undeniable visual proof of the physical cruelty of slavery and became one of the most powerful abolitionist images of the 19th century. Brazilian girl Helena Valero was kidnapped as a child in the 1930s by members of the Yanomami, an isolated indigenous group living deep in the Amazon rainforest. She spent more than 20 years living among them, where she endured repeated violence, forced marriages, sexual abuse, and the killing of her children during tribal conflicts. After escaping back to Western society in 1956, she struggled to reintegrate and was treated as an outsider, never fully belonging to either world. Haunted by trauma, yet emotionally tied to the only life she truly knew, Valero eventually chose to return to live with indigenous tribes in the Amazon, remaining there until her death in 2003, a rare and unsettling case of someone voluntarily returning to a society that once abducted them. They thought she was just a sweet, innocent grandma, but behind her front door was pure horror. In the 1980s, California woman Dorothea Puente used her Sacramento boarding house as a hunting ground for the vulnerable. She took in the elderly, the homeless, alcoholics, and people with mental illness, those with monthly government checks and no family to worry about them. Once they trusted her, she allegedly drugged them with heavy sedatives, suffocated them in their sleep, and buried them in her backyard like garbage. Tenants began mysteriously disappearing, but Puente kept cashing their social security payments and forging signatures as if they were still alive. Neighbors complained of a foul stench and constant digging in her yard, but police believed her every time she claimed the tenants had simply moved out. In 1988, police finally searched her property and dug up body after body, unearthing 7 decomposing corpses hidden in shallow graves. Even then, Puente was so calm and grandmotherly that officers let her step outside to get coffee, and she fled the state. After a nationwide manhunt, she was caught and eventually linked to at least 9 murders, though many believe the real number was far higher. Verne Troyer lived with a rare genetic condition called cartilage hair hypoplasia, which left him just 2 feet 8 inches tall and caused lifelong medical complications. Despite worldwide fame as Mini-Me, he struggled for years with severe depression and alcohol dependency, leading to repeated hospitalizations and psychiatric interventions. In April of 2018, Troyer was hospitalized following a serious health crisis related to alcohol and died shortly after at the age of 48. Authorities later confirmed his passing was intentional, highlighting the long-term toll of his mental health struggles behind the scenes of his public success. In 2022, a 19-year-old woman in Brazil gave birth to twins who were later confirmed by DNA testing to have different fathers. The rare biological phenomenon behind this is called heteropaternal superfecundation, which occurs when 2 eggs released during the same ovulation cycle are fertilized by sperm from different men within a short window of time. Although the twins develop together in the womb and are born at the same time, they're genetically half-siblings. Fewer than a few dozen confirmed cases have been documented worldwide, making it one of the rarest known anomalies in human reproduction. At just 8 years old, future UFC champion Ronda Rousey lived through a nightmare most fans never hear about. Her father, Ron Rousey, suffered a brutal sledding accident that shattered his back and left doctors warning him that he would slowly lose all mobility, develop a deadly blood disorder, and die in agonizing decline. Unable to face a future of paralysis and hopelessness, he made a devastating decision. Ronda has said the trauma never left her, and that her rage, toughness, and kill or be killed mentality in the cage were born from that loss. In 2014, a Ryanair flight issued 3 warnings telling passengers not to eat nuts because a 4-year-old girl on board had a life-threatening nut allergy. One passenger ignored them, opened a packet of nuts anyway, and the girl almost immediately went into anaphylactic shock. Her tongue swelled, she turned blue, and briefly lost consciousness as crew scrambled to inject adrenaline and prepare for an emergency landing, all because one idiotic passenger couldn't resist a snack. The girl barely survived, and the airline banned the selfish passenger for 2 years. 18-year-old Kylie Montero thought she was starting her future, newly graduated, 11 weeks pregnant, and dreaming of naming her baby girl Eleanor. But instead, she walked straight into a nightmare. Her boyfriend, 22-year-old Gregory Groom, had a violent history she tried to escape, even hiding in a domestic abuse shelter for 3 weeks. But like too many victims before her, she went back hoping he'd change. On August 6, 2025, during a late-night visit to his house, an argument turned terrifying when Gregory threw her to the ground, pulled her hair, and started strangling her. Knowing something was seriously wrong, she sent one last chilling text to her sister. "My phone is at 4%. If I die, it was Greg." Moments later, he reportedly stabbed her in the neck and chest, killing not just Kylie, but also the unborn child she was excited to raise. Instead of calling for help, he spent hours digging a grave in his own backyard, and around sunrise, he shoved her body into the shallow hole like trash. For 13 days, Kylie's family begged for answers while Gregory acted innocent, until police finally found her buried behind his house. He was arrested and has pleaded not guilty. In 1993, 16-year-old Marie Robard seemed like the perfect student, quiet, polite, straight A's, and deeply trusted by her single father, Stephen. They lived alone together, and friends said she appeared mature and responsible, even helping to care for him. But beneath the surface, Marie was quietly angry about one thing: a custody ruling that forced her to live with her dad instead of her mother. She grew more distant over time, secretly obsessing over how to change her situation. Then one night, her father suddenly collapsed in excruciating pain and died just hours later. Doctors believed it was a heart attack, and Marie played the role of a heartbroken daughter so well that nobody suspected a thing. Life moved on. Over a year passed before a friend came forward with a chilling confession. Marie had stolen barium acetate from her school's chemistry lab and mixed it into her dad's refried beans, calmly poisoning him just so she could live somewhere else. Investigators exhumed the body, confirmed the toxin, and charged her with murder. She was charged as an adult, convicted, and sentenced to 28 years in prison. But in a shocking twist, the honor student killer was paroled after just 7 years, walking free before she even turned 30. Morbid Facts, Part 770. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects: severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily diffused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. Mary Kay-Letourneau became one of the most notorious teachers in American history after authorities discovered she'd formed an illegal relationship with a 12-year-old student in her class, a crime that shocked the country and completely destroyed her family. She was arrested in 1997 and sent to prison, where she gave birth to his child while still serving time. When she got out on parole, a judge ordered her to stay away from the boy entirely, but she was caught violating that order and was sent back to prison to finish a full 7-year sentence, a move prosecutors said showed how disturbingly deep her attraction to him ran. When she was finally released, the story took an even darker turn. The former student, now an adult, chose to reunite with her, and the pair eventually married in 2005 despite their relationship beginning as a felony case, described by experts as a profound abuse of power. They stayed together for over a decade before finally separating, leaving behind one of the most unsettling and controversial teacher-student scandals in recorded history. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. This footage shows former Nazi concentration camp guard Joseph Schutz covering his face as he arrived at a German courtroom in 2022. At 101 years old, Schutz became the oldest person ever tried and convicted for Holocaust-era crimes. Prosecutors argued that while serving as an SS guard at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp between 1942 and 1945, he knowingly assisted in the systematic murder of at least 3,500 prisoners. Schutz claimed he did absolutely nothing wrong and was not aware of the gruesome crimes being carried out at the camp. He was convicted as an accessory to murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he remained free while appealing the verdict. Schutz died in April of 2023 before serving his sentence. Angie Barlow, a British woman with a severe fear of dentists, avoided professional dental care for roughly a decade by repeatedly supergluing loose or fallen teeth back into her mouth. Instead of fixing the underlying decay and gum disease, the glue trapped bacteria beneath the teeth and caused progressive infections. Over time, the damage became catastrophic, with dentists later finding that up to 90% of the bones supporting her upper teeth had been destroyed. By the time she finally sought treatment, 11 teeth had to be removed, much of her jawbone had deteriorated, and she required extensive reconstructive surgery and dental implants to restore basic oral function. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of two of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. This was the moment a man attempted to rob a small loans office in Kazakhstan, smashing through thin laminated safety glass at the receptionist's window. He then quickly climbed inside, grabbed the female clerk, and threatened her with a knife to force her cooperation. He stole about $340 before fleeing, but police arrested him later that same day. Authorities confirmed he was eventually prosecuted and ultimately sentenced to 7 years in prison for the robbery, while the clerk managed to escape unharmed. This person looked over the balcony of their high-rise apartment building to realize they owned a cat, not a pussy. Here's a clip of a man trapped inside a grain silo with thousands of pounds of grain pressing in from every direction. What makes this situation so horrifying is that grain doesn't behave like a solid. Once it starts moving, it flows like liquid, pulling a person under like quicksand. Within seconds, someone can be buried up to their chest, and struggling only makes it worse. By this point, self-rescue is nearly impossible. The pressure restricts breathing, and panic speeds up suffocation. The only real chance of survival is to stop moving and hold a small pocket of air around around your face, keeping your head above the grain until rescuers arrive. Accordingly, dozens of farmers die every year in this exact way due to grain entrapment. In 2008, 23-year-old New York teacher Hannah Upp suddenly disappeared during a morning run, prompting a massive search across Manhattan. She was found nearly 20 days later floating near the Hudson River, dehydrated, hypothermic, but miraculously still alive. Doctors later diagnosed her with dissociative fugue, a rare condition in which a person can mindlessly travel or wander with no awareness of their identity, the same condition Walter White claimed he had in Breaking Bad. 5 years later in Maryland, she went missing again. She was located 2 days later lying in a nearby creek, still wearing the same clothes she'd left home in and with no memory of how she got there. Her third disappearance happened in 2017 when she was living in the U.S. Virgin Islands. She reportedly prepared for work as usual before leaving home just as a hurricane was approaching. Her car was later located near a beach with her wallet, phone, and keys inside, but she was never found. Searches by air, land, and water turned up no additional clues, and since that day, Hannah Upp has never been seen again. Dr. Dre's younger half-brother, Tyree Crayon, met a violent and mysterious end in 1989 at just 21 years old. He was reportedly killed during a street altercation in Compton where he suffered a broken neck. But despite Dre's fame, Tyree's case was never solved, and very little information about the case has ever been released. Some reports suggest records may have been lost after the troubled Compton Police Department was disbanded years later, leaving his death forever shrouded in uncertainty. To this day, Dre has spoken about the deep emotional scar left by his brother's murder. In 2013, a Virginia man accidentally left his phone recording during a routine colonoscopy, only to later discover chilling audio of the medical staff mocking and humiliating him while he was unconscious. The anesthesiologist was caught calling him names, joking about giving him syphilis, and even plotting to cover up potential mistakes by blaming the patient. Outraged, the man sued, and in 2015, a jury awarded him $500,000 in damages. Ed Gein is one of the most disturbing killers in American history, not because of how many people he killed, but because of what police found inside of his farmhouse. Although he was only confirmed to have murdered 2 women, he spent years digging up corpses of women who looked like his mother, whom he was obsessed with, and bringing them home to turn their bodies into art pieces. When investigators entered his home, they found a nightmarish scene straight out of a horror movie. Bowls made from human skulls, chairs upholstered with skin, masks of faces peeled from corpses hung on the walls, a box filled with severed noses, and even lips nailed to a window shade pull cord. He had a belt made of nipples and made corsets and leggings out of human skin, all part of his plan to build a full woman suit so he could wear it and become his dead mother. Ed even admitted he tried to dig up his own mother's corpse, but gave up because she was too heavy. One of his 2 victims, Bernice Warden's body, was found hanging upside down in his shed, gutted like a deer, and police also discovered a human heart in a paper bag near the stove because he wanted to cook it later. Neighbors later reported seeing a strange female figure dancing in the moonlight on his property, most likely Gein wearing one of his skin suits outside. The horror was so extreme that multiple officers who investigated his farmhouse quit the force from trauma, and despite his house being a rotting, corpse-filled disaster, he kept his mother's bedroom pristine and untouched like a shrine. Perhaps the most chilling part of all was that the townspeople thought he was completely harmless. He babysat their kids and did chores while secretly wearing the dead in his spare time. Declared insane rather than executed, he lived quietly in a mental institution doing arts and crafts with paper instead of human body parts, until his death when people robbed his grave and stole his headstone as a trophy. Ed Gein's crimes were so grotesque and twisted that he became the direct inspiration for characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, forever defining the skin-wearing, mother-obsessed killer in horror. In April of 2023, 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis was riding with friends through rural upstate New York when their GPS led them into the wrong driveway. Realizing their mistake, they immediately began turning around to leave, but homeowner Kevin Monahan quickly emerged with a shotgun. Without a word, he fired 2 blasts into the vehicle as it rolled away, one round striking Kaylin in the neck. Her friends frantically drove miles searching for cell service, but by the time they reached any help, she was dead. At trial, prosecutors described how Monahan showed no remorse, even claiming he had done nothing wrong. The next year, a jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life, leaving Kaylin's family haunted by the fact that a single wrong turn ended in their daughter's execution-style death. In March of 2023, Peruvian police discovered an 800-year-old mummy hidden in a food delivery bag. Its keeper, 26-year-old Julio Cesar Bermejo, claimed the remains were his spiritual girlfriend named Juanita and that she'd been in his family for generations. but experts revealed the preserved body was actually a man who died around age 45. The mummy was seized by Peru's Ministry of Culture for protection, while Bermejo was detained as authorities investigated how he came to treat a centuries-old corpse as his lover.